Hello and welcome to MyNewtNews. I'm not a newt. My name is not Newt, but you can call me Newt. I'm going to be talking to you today about an opinion piece in The Atlantic by Brian Klaas talking about Putin. It's titled The Dictator Trap. Putin isn't getting the real deal, and there's a lot of details on it, and I'll get to that, and I will give you my opinion on it and some things that I guess you'd say that some of the things that are reminded me or that reflect this same issue within our own government. I'll get into all that. In the meantime, if you could, give me a like and a subscribe, I'd appreciate it. As we go through, if you see anything in there or you hear anything that you want to comment on, please feel free to leave a comment. And at the end, I will have links to some of my other videos that you may be interested in. Let's dive in. The Atlantic. Vladimir Putin has fallen into the dictator trap by Brian Klaas. And I don't think we need to, if you want to go to it, I'll include the link in the description. In the span of a couple of weeks, Vladimir Putin, a man recently described by Donald Trump as a strategic genius, managed to revitalize NATO, unify a splintered West, turn Ukraine's little-known president into a global hero, wreck Russia's economy, and solidify his legacy as a murderous war criminal. How did he miscalculate so badly? First of all, I don't know that granted he has revitalized NATO. I don't know how much he's unified a splintered West. I know that Germany is talking about buying F-35s from the United States to up their ability to defend themselves, but are they going to actually cut the cord and not buy fuels, especially natural gas, from Russia? Because Russia has an awful lot of sway with Germany because of that. I don't know that he's unified it in the long run. If there is unification in the West, it may be short term. I know that China has given some tepid support, but it seems like India is giving a little bit more strong support, which saddens me because I thought that, India as a democracy might actually, use their influence with Russia to kind of push against this. But that does not seem to be the case. I guess they decided that getting cheap fuel and also their continued access to an alternate to Western military aid or Western military equipment was worth, kind of standing behind basically a dictator. Going back to the story, to answer that question, you have to understand the power and information ecosystems around dictators. I've studied and interviewed despots across the globe for more than a decade. In my research, I persistently encountered a stubborn myth of the savvy strongman, the rational, calculating despot who can play the long game because he, and it's typically a he, doesn't have to worry about pesky polls or angry voters. Our elected leaders, this view suggests, are no match for the tyrant who gazes into the next decade rather than fretting about next year's elections. Reality doesn't conform to that rosy theory. Autocrats such as Putin eventually succumb to what may be called the dictator trap. The strategies they use to stay in power tend to trigger their eventual downfall. Rather than being long-term planners, many make catastrophic short-term errors, the kind of errors that would likely have been avoided in a democratic systems. Maybe. They hear only from sycophants and get bad advice. They misunderstand their population. They don't see threats coming until it's too late. And unlike elected leaders who leave office to riches, book tours, and the glitzy lifestyle of a statesman, many dictators who miscalculate leave office in a coffin, a possibility that makes them even more likely to double down. And I think that in some ways they're giving democratic systems too much credit, because I think people in power are pretty insular. I don't think that, say, Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi, either one, really know that much about the actual plight of workers and truck drivers and farmers and, just normal people, because I think that their main focus is the martini party crowd, and they're talking to people about fundraising, and they're not looking for $5 or $10 a shot. They're looking at thousands, or an aggregator who can bring them tens or hundreds or millions. So I think that our leaders are more insulated than this guy gives them credit for. Despots sow the seed of their own demise early on when they first face the trade-off between allowing freedom of expression and maintaining an iron grip on power. After arriving in the palace, crushing dissent and jailing opponents is often rational from the perspective of a dictator. It creates a culture of fear that is useful for establishing and maintaining control. But that culture of fear comes with a cost. For those of us living in liberal democracies, criticizing the boss is risky, but we're not going to be shipped off to a gulag or watch our families get tortured. In authoritarian regimes, those all too real risks have a way of focusing the mind. Is it ever worthwhile for authoritarian advisors to speak truth to power? And sadly, I think that those risks living in a liberal democracy, quote unquote, that granted you may or may not be shipped off to the gulag, but I think that, as Tucker Carlson and Tulsi Gabbard recently learned, that if you criticize the government, that the people are going to come after you, and in their cases, accuse them of spitting out Russian propaganda. And I'm so old that I remember when the left actually stood up and stood for free speech, stood for criticizing the government. And that seems like that's kind of fading out of fashion now, sad to say. As a result, despots rarely get told their stupid ideas are stupid, or their ill-conceived wars are likely to be catastrophic. Offering honest criticism is a deadly game, and most advisors avoid doing so. Those who dare to gamble eventually lose and are purged. So over time, the advisors who remain are usually yes men who act like bobbleheads, nodding along when the despot outlines some crackpot scheme. And again, I don't think that's just limited to dictators. I think that, Donald Trump, when he was president, I think that he tended to want to have people around him that agreed with him and thought he was smart because, Donald Trump had a huge ego. And I think that he did some good stuff, and I think some of the people in his administration did really good stuff, and I think he did some stupid stuff and ran his mouth more than he really should have. But I think, again, I don't see many people in the Biden administration that are speaking up and saying, well, Mr. President, I don't know that it's a good idea to go to Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and ask them to increase production when we're not increasing domestic production, because that makes us look bad, because we're willing to give money to dictators in Saudi Arabia or Venezuela instead of giving it to American oil field workers. But apparently, if anybody's telling him that, he ain't listening. I think a lot of the time that the people in power, regardless of whether they're in a democracy or if they're in a dictatorship, that they don't hear a lot of opposing views. And for instance, here, a lot of their opposing views, oh, well, hardly anybody thinks that. That's just a crackpot view, regardless of whether that's Donald Trump in office or Joe Biden or anybody else. That I think that there's that tendency, because you have people around you that for the most part agree with you, that you're not getting that unfiltered view, that you're getting that rosy view on the stuff that you want. And anybody that criticizes you, oh, well, they're just crackpots, they're just Trump supporters, or they're never Trumpers, or whatever. Even with such seemingly loyal cronies, despots face a dilemma. How can you trust the loyalty of an entourage that has every reason to lie and conceal its true thoughts? The ancient Greek philosopher Xenophon wrote of that inescapable paradox of tyranny. It is never possible for the tyrant to trust that he is loved, and plots against tyrants spring from none more than from those who pretend to love them the most. And that's a very true thing, that I think that that's why so many famous people, if you look at some of the Hollywood people, I think a lot of them are just straight up paranoid because they don't know who they can trust, because the people around them, keep telling them, oh, you're wonderful, because they're making money from them. If you're hot, making $60 million a movie, they think you're great and everybody tells you you're wonderful, even if they hate your guts. But you have one stumble or you have a flop or two in a row, then suddenly, oh, I always knew you were horrible. I just didn't believe it. And then suddenly everybody turns on you, so you're going to get paranoid. You're not going to trust people. You're going to have, I don't know the word for it, to be honest. You're going to be back crap crazy. And that explains 95% of Hollywood. And this is my personal opinion, and if you do not agree with me, more power to you. Hope it works out for you. And by the way, everything said that I say, other than specifically reading the article, is my opinion. It's only opinion. I cannot prove a lot of it with, mainstream media news articles or extreme outside the limit news articles. It's just my opinion, and it's worth every cent you paid for it. To solve this problem, despots create loyalty tests, ghoulish charades to separate true believers from pretenders. To be trusted, advisors must lie on behalf of the regime. Those who repeat absurd claims without blinking are deemed loyal. Anyone who hesitates is considered suspect. In Kim Jong-un's North Korea, for example, the lies have gotten progressively more ridiculous. Once a lie becomes widely accepted, the value of that individual loyalty test declines. Once everyone knows that Kim Jong-un learned to drive when he was just 3 years old, a more extreme lie must emerge for the test to serve its purpose. The cycle repeats itself, and a cult of personality is born. Why? They say that like that they don't expect us to believe that Kim Jong-un learned to drive when he was just 3 years old. Plenty of people around Putin understand that dynamic, which is why they are willing to parrot Putin's outlandish claim that the Jewish president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is presiding over a neo-Nazi state. Such myth-making can happen in democracies too. If you have an authoritarian-style leader, just consider how many Republicans have fallen over one another to endorse Donald Trump's lies about the 2020 election in order to prove their MAGA bona fides. And honestly, you can say that just as much about the Democrats and maybe the Libertarians. Of course, we don't hear much from the Libertarians. But, I think any group is going to have that knee-jerk reaction of, but that's my side. Why are you criticizing? No, it's, our leader of our party, whatever that party may be, they wouldn't lie to us. That's just a fabrication. But to stay in power, despots have to worry about more than just their advisors and cronies. They have to win over, intimidate, or coerce their population too. That's why dictators invest in state-sponsored media. In Russia, the state goes so far as to present fake presidential candidates who pretend to oppose Putin in rigged elections. The whole system is a Potemkin village, an illusion of choice and political debate. And I know some people are going to get mad at me for using this example, but that happens in the United States too. If you look at the 2016 election and look at Bernie Sanders, a lot of people, and I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying that a lot of people believe that basically he was controlled opposition, that you run somebody that's perceived on the far, far left and who's anti-big business against the conventional candidate, and then when they lose, then that candidate, the far left, socialist millionaire Bernie Sanders, comes out and endorses Hillary Clinton and then goes and buys a beach house. And all the Bernie Sanders supporters are supposed to go, oh, well, yeah, Bernie said that we should vote for Hillary because she's better than Trump. But we really wanted Bernie because we really want free health care and blah, blah, blah. I know that some of his supporters actually sued the Democratic National Committee over that election cycle. I don't know that I ever heard what finally happened. I think the case got thrown out. But I do know that I read an article, and again, I can't put my finger on what source that was from, but I remember reading an article stating that the lawyers for the Democratic National Committee came out in court and said, in their filing with the court, their reasoning was that there was no legal obligation for the Democratic National Committee to provide a fair primary, which sounds an awful lot to me like, yeah, it was rigged, but we don't have to have a fair one. Like, wow. And I will be honest, I have serious doubts about the Republican primaries just as much as the Democrat primaries. I think that there's a lot of the local parties. If you have somebody in Texas or Oklahoma, that the local Republican officials probably have a lot of pull within that area, that if somebody runs in the primaries, or tries to run in the primaries, that they don't like, that doesn't adhere to their viewpoint, that even though they're a member of their own party, that they will fight to keep them out. And I think that happens in the Democrats, and I wish it didn't happen in either. I think that we should have a fair choice, because the problem is that if you don't get involved in the primaries, then the party machines create the candidate that they want, and then in the general election, that you've got a choice between the poor candidate with the D behind their name or the poor candidate with the R behind their name. So that's why I always like to vote in the primaries, because at least then I feel like I voted for the person that I think would be the most likely to do the best job. And sadly, they very seldom become the candidate, which is very frustrating, because it seems like that, the people with money and influence tend to have a lot more pull in deciding who the presidential candidate is than I do, because they have more money. And sadly, that's the way of the world. And anyway, I'm rambling, aren't I? Fake presidential candidates, again, that mechanism of control comes with a cost. Some citizens brainwashed by state propaganda will support a war that is sure to backfire. Others privately oppose the regime, but will be too afraid to say anything. As a result, reliable polling doesn't exist in autocracies. Russia is no exception. That means that despots like Putin are unable to accurately understand the attitudes of their own people. And that's the thing about an autocracy. For a long time, potentially, the people in charge, they're living high. They are doing well. The only problem is when you finally get knocked off the rails, and just ask Muammar Gaddafi or Ceausescu of Romania what happens when the high living ends. And it ends abruptly, and it ain't pretty. Look at Adolf Hitler, down in the bunker with a 9mm pointed at your head. I think it was a 9mm. Maybe not. Anyway, doesn't matter. Maybe it was a 32. Doesn't matter. When you're putting the pistol to your head and blowing your brains out, if it works, if you're in there in the bunker, hundreds of feet underground with the bombs and the shells exploding above you, you ain't living the high life no more. And it's a lot better to be a Western politician who decides to, well, I'm going to spend more time with my family, and I'm going to sit around and accept the largesse of the American people that I have voted in for myself, and I will have my fine retirement pay, which is a significant portion of my regular pay, and I will drink mojitos and kick back with my feet up on the couch cushions and enjoy the life that I have arranged for myself. So, yeah. If you live in a fake world long enough, it can start to feel real. Dictators and despots begin to believe their own lies, repeated back at them and propagated by state-controlled media. That might help explain why Putin's recent speeches have stood out as unhinged rants. It's certainly possible that his mind has succumbed to his own propaganda, creating a warped worldview in which invasion of the Ukraine was, as Trump put it, an incredibly savvy move. Well, and again, it's not just dictators, because I guarantee you that the people in Washington, especially the people regardless of party, who have been there 30, 40, 50 years, they hear trickles from their constituents, and I'm sure a lot of them, they get a whole bunch of emails on some topic and they said, oh, MSNBC must have run a story, or Rush Limbaugh, well, of course Rush Limbaugh is gone now, but Glenn Beck must have brought up this, so that got a bunch of, that's why I got a couple of hundred emails about this subject. But when I'm going to the cocktail party and meeting with the CEOs of companies and talking with other politicians, this never comes up. So I'm sure that this is the real deal, and that those emails from constituents are just outliers. And so, you live in that bubble. I remember seeing a man on the street interview thing that, I can't remember who did it, but it might have been Louder with Crowder. But they were in New York just going up to random people and saying, do you know any Republicans, or do you have any, would you be friends with a Republican? And of course everybody's like, no. No. Well, but the thing is that, I'm sure something similar, if you go into certain areas of Texas or Oklahoma or Tennessee, that you get similar. Would you be friends with a Democrat? You go down to the gun range and ask, I'm sure you're going to get a lot of no's. If you go to that big gun show in Tulsa, you're not going to get a whole bunch of people going, yes, I really support support Beto O'Rourke? No, it's not going to happen. So it depends on who you ask. And if you are living in an echo chamber, you're just going to hear your opinion kicked back at you regardless of how true it is. And that's one of the problems, like with Twitter. I think that a lot of people in the media and government, that they think Twitter is the real opinion of the majority of people, and it's not. It's no more than if you look at TikTok and think that that's a representation of the United States, because it's not. I mean, there's some crazy stuff going on there. But again, I have wandered off topic. The risks of miscalculation are compounded, psychology research has shown, by the fact that power literally goes to your head, including in a key way that may be relevant in explaining Putin's costly gambit in Ukraine. The longer somebody is in power, the more they begin to get a sense of what is known as illusory control, a mistaken belief that they can control outcomes much more than they actually can. That delusion is particularly dangerous in dictatorships in which there are virtually no checks or balances, no term limits, or free elections to boot someone from power. Some Russian experts, such as Fiona Hill, have recently suggested that Putin has spent much of the pandemic isolated and alone, poring over old maps of the lost Russian Imperium. Cumulatively, it's possible to imagine how these factors combine to convince Putin that his brutal blunder in Ukraine was a good idea. When despots screw up, they need to watch their own back. Yet again, they can become victims of the dictator trap. To crush prospective enemies, they must demand loyalty and crack down on criticism. But the more they do so, the lower the quality of information they receive and the less they can trust the people who purport to serve them. As a result, even when government officials learn about plots to overthrow an autocrat, they may not share their knowledge. This is known as the vacuum effect, and it means that authoritarian presidents might learn of coup attempts and putsches only when it's too late. This raises a question that should keep Putin up at night. If the oligarchs were to eventually make a move against him, would anyone warn him? And that's the thing, that he does have to worry about that, because a lot of people that are very, very wealthy are potentially losing a lot of money with the sanctions and having their yachts confiscated in the UK. They may just think, you know what? We've got this general over here and he's pretty charismatic and he's willing to back us and we're willing to back him, so maybe it's time for Putin to leave. And I would not be shocked, and again, this is just my opinion, I would not be shocked if within the next month or so, we hear that Putin has died from heart attack, stroke, COVID, whatever they want to say, cancer, adrenal failure, whatever. When in reality it's a 9mm through the head, not of his choosing. Clearly, Putin is no fool, but as we debate possible endgames to the war in Ukraine, we shouldn't kid ourselves. Putin, like many despots, isn't behaving fully rationally. He inhabits a fantasy world surrounded by people who are afraid to challenge him, with a mind that has been poisoned by more than 2 decades as a tyrant. He's made a catastrophic mistake in Ukraine, one that may yet prove his downfall. Democracy isn't perfect. It's messy. It can be short-sighted. Many powerful democracies, including the United States, are dysfunctional. But at least our leaders face real constraints, real pushback for their miscalculations, and real criticisms from their population. And crucially, there's a built-in mechanism to replace our leaders when they start to behave irrationally or irresponsibly. That's why it's time to jettison the myth of the savvy strongman or the dictator who's a geopolitical genius. Putin has fallen victim to the dictator trap and proved that he is neither. Well, and in that I disagree, because the thing is, you can be incredibly savvy and you can be a geopolitical genius, but just like a computer, if you're fed bad information, you're going to come up with the wrong solution to the problem. The old computer saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you're having to make a decision on something, you have to rely on the intel that you're given, and if you're given the wrong intel, then you're going to make the wrong decision. It doesn't mean that you're not savvy. And no, I'm not pro-Putin. I think that, the sooner he passes from the scene, shall we say, the better the world will be. But the question is, you've got to be careful about that too, because what's going to replace him? It's like the Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran was a steaming pile of crap. in my personal opinion. But was the Islamic Republic that replaced him, is that better for the people of Iran? I personally don't think so. We don't really know what they think for the most part. I'm sure that there are a lot of people support it, a lot of people against it. But just in general, especially for, say, women, I don't think that's been an improvement for them. And that looks like that is about all I've got on this today. Before I just go on too long a rant about the dictators are bad, but we've got problems ourselves, because I don't want us to be in a dictatorship. I don't want to live in a dictatorship. I want to live in a free democratic republic where we have a representative government, as in we elect politicians who go to the Capitol to represent us, which sadly I don't think happens as much as we would hope. I think that a lot of times that we elect politicians, not necessarily knowing that we are doing so, but we elect politicians that are going to Washington to either represent big corporations or unions that give them a lot of money, or to just represent their own naked desire for power and money. And sadly, I think that if you took the 535 people in the House and the Senate, that if you could get 10 or 15 really honest, upstanding citizens who are selfless and are there to represent the people back in their district instead of their own personal interests or the interests of people who give them big donations, I think I would be shocked if it were more than that. And I hope I'm wrong. I really, really do. It would be so refreshing to be wrong about something like that and find out that a large majority of the House and the Senate are there to selflessly promote our needs and will. But considering that they just voted to give their staffing budgets for their little minions 20%, no, it was 21% increase, kind of makes me think that maybe that's not the case. But I could be wrong. Regardless, thanks for listening to MyNewtNews. Like and subscribe if you can, and in the end screen there's going to be some videos that I hope you might be interested in. Take a look at them. Thanks. Bye.